and that the aggression towards Israel and its allies can only lead to negative consequences. Today, it's disheartening to see the United States moving closer to Turkey and Qatar than our traditional allies, pressing the Israelis for an immediate ceasefire. There is no doubt our reaction to the Israel-Gaza conflict is being watched and gauged by nations like Iran, and our failure to stand firmly beside our ally will only embolden that nation to continue its criminal efforts to develop and build a nuclear device. Any equivocation or perceived weakness on our part will be noticed immediately in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran. It can only help us usher in a new nuclear arms race, one that holds the potential of becoming infinitely more frightening than the one the free world endured decades ago. Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terrorist groups have demonstrated time and again that they have no regard for human life, Israeli, Palestinian, or American. The possibilities of individuals like that gaining access to a nuclear weapon is something we simply cannot allow. These are the very stakes of the conflict currently underway in Israel. We pray for peace. We need to accept that true, lasting peace can only happen with the elimination of all missiles in Gaza, the destruction of the tunnels between Gaza and Israel, and the disarmament of terrorist groups. Anything short of that will just delay the next round of conflict and encourage our enemies. Only through our resolve and our continued dedication to the freedom and the safety of the Israeli people can we ensure that our own safety and that of the free peoples around the world will be protected. Wow. That's quite eloquent. That kind of reminds me of how Ronald Reagan kind of talked and expressed similar ideals. And Reagan worked very, very hard at establishing peace accords between the Palestinians and the government of Israel, as well as Egypt, and etc., back in the days. So, considering the fact that I say that Perry's words are reminiscent of some of Reagan's, says a lot, because Reagan wasn't just a warmonger, but a lot of people like to say he was, but he actually did a lot of brokering for peace. In fact, he did a lot better in that regard than the peacenik himself, Jimmy Carter, did. Yet Jimmy Carter got the Nobel Peace Prize. Imagine that, folks. In any way, shape, or form, kind of want to move on from that, but since we're talking about that particular issue, let's consider some other things that may have gone on, just in case you all weren't paying any attention, or for some reason you got going with your weekend. Maybe like members of the Senate, you ducked out early, or not early, but you ducked out and had a long weekend. Or maybe you're on vacation, or for whatever reason you didn't get the news on late Friday or Saturday. Some interesting things happened in the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives was to go on recess on Thursday as soon as the ending bell rung, so to speak. But what actually happened? Well, the House, one of the last things they did on Thursday was they passed a law saying, hey, we're going to meet back tomorrow and try to finalize some of these things, because some of these are really important. And there were 4 huge bills, 3 big issues that they needed to meet and address, and they addressed all of them. One was the federal highway funding bill. Now, if you remember, you look at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. It lists the things that Congress is responsible for. One of them is establishing and maintaining postal roads, and they're also responsible for interstate commerce. So, in order to move goods and services across state borders, you have the interstate highway system, which is also being used as an emergency evacuation system should there be a natural disaster or worse. And then those roads are also used for the conveyance of ground transported postal items, especially through the USPS, and that's its own big ball of failure these days, but it still falls under the purview of Congress. So they had the highway bill, which they passed and sent over to the Senate. Then they had, since we were just talking about it, they elected, or they voted to and passed a bill to renew some funding in order to resupply and refit and do a couple upgrades to Israel's Iron Dome program. That got passed. So that's two big things that got passed there. Of course, they're sitting in the Senate, and they're sitting in a big stack of stuff the Senate hasn't even looked at yet. And these are all bills that have been passed on the House. You know, as President Obama says, the do-nothing House that's been stonewalling everything. They haven't stonewalled anything. They've passed a whole buttload of bills. The only thing is the Senate isn't passing anything. And what the Senate is passing, the House isn't going to agree to. And what the House is passing, the Senate, in many cases, won't even entertain because the President said, we're going to veto it. So they won't even bring it up to a vote. I mean, heck, what if it passed with 70 votes? That's more than 2/3. And what if it passed, pretty close to unanimous in the House as well? Well, then it stands to reason that the President will probably sign it instead of vetoing, because if he does, he's just going to send it back and it'll go underneath the votes and it'll get passed over his head anyway. So why waste the time other than to make the stand and say, I'm in charge. I'll do what I want. But two bills got passed as well that had to deal with the immigration crisis. One of which was a modified version of Representative Marsha Blackburn's H.R. 5230. The original one was tossed to the side, but they ended up going back and doing some rehashing on it. The original bill was set to give about $659 million to the border activities directed at various things, primarily Border Patrol, ICE, and Department of Justice to be able to finance some additional judges that would deal specifically with the cases for amnesty, or amnesty is the wrong word, asylum, whether they get asylum or get deported, and kind of expedite those cases. And then also funding for the Department of Defense, particularly the Reserves and National Guard, in order to provide assets to increase border security. And most of that funding came through rescissions. In other words, money that we're coming near the end of the budget year, and this is money that's been budgeted for various programs, but so far hasn't been used for one reason or another. So it's sitting there not doing anything. And a lot of times, having been in the military, I'm going to say right now, coming towards the end of the budget year, coming up in September, if your particular unit had money left over that hadn't used, well, in order to get that new budget supply or justify getting more money come, October 1st when the new budget kicked in, you went and you blew the wad. You blew whatever you had left. Sometimes on stuff you don't need, it was like, that's a nice to have, or, some cases, it's a want, but not necessities. And I've seen a lot of that. And it was all, hey, if you don't spend it this year, we're not going to get what we need next year. That was the mentality. So there's a lot of that money that's laying around that hasn't been used yet. So they did recessions. They said, you haven't used it. I don't see a plan for you to use it. So we're going to take it and we're going to reallocate it. And we're going to reallocate it, here, there, and everywhere. So it's not increased spending. It's just a reallocation of funds. And they went back and they readjusted, and they went from $659 million to $694 million. So they bumped it up a couple $1 million, about $45 million. 45 or is it 35 million? 35 million. I was not a math student. My math is normally pretty good, but I was not a math expert. You have to go to my brother for that. Anyway, it's $35 million. So $35 more million allocated pretty much along those lines. And they passed the bill. It passed 223 to 189. There were 20 people who didn't even bother to vote. One of the people that crossed the line and voted, it was mostly along party lines, but one of the Democrats crossed the line and voted in along with Republicans was Representative Hank Cuellar, who is one of the co-authors of the Humane Act, along with Senator John Cornyn out of Texas. They're both out of Texas. So Henry Cuellar, crossed the line, crossed all the party lines and voted in favor of Blackburn's bill. And then there was a second bill, 5272, which kind of mirrored one of Ted Cruz's bills, and it was designed to basically, there's an executive order, executive policy called DACA, Deferred Action for Child Arrivals. And it was unilateral, done from the executive office by the president. It was not legislated, but it was legislated. There was a policy given through a loophole in legislation. Well, they closed that loophole, and they basically said, sorry, President Obama can't do DACA. We're ending it right here and right now. Bam, gone. That passed. Not quite as well, but it passed with 216 to 192, with 23 personnel who didn't vote. Of note, though, Eric Cantor, since he lost his primary, he turned around and tendered his resignation, and he's leaving office on August 18th. Well, he did not put in a vote for any immigration bill whatsoever. He just said, I'm not voting. So, but back to the Iron Dome funding, that was $225 million, which is not a drop in the bucket, but it's significantly less than what we're going to spend on our own border, or what the House has agreed to. And both of them combined are a heck of a lot less than what the Democrats want to spend on the border bill. And their border bill will do nothing for the border except throw a bunch of money. It's not even directed at certain programs. It's just, hey, let's increase money for, dealing with these kids. Now, let's bring up the issue of these children. What's happening with them? Well, many of them are being moved to foster facilities, so to speak, around the nation, and that has states that are not border states now getting into this and getting an uproar. Even Massachusetts, which is normally a very left-leaning state, has turned around and said, hey, wait a second, you're sending them here? No. So you've even got that happening now. But by and large, most of them are remaining in their various border states where they were taken and detained. And reports now are saying that just in the San Antonio area of Texas, which of course, San Antonio houses Lackland Air Force Base, which is one of the largest detention and processing centers for these illegal alien children. And as many as 4,000 of them in the metropolitan area of San Antonio are in a form of foster care, and they will be attending San Antonio public schools starting in about 3 weeks. Now, these kids, they're not American citizens. Their parents aren't paying taxes here. They're not paying taxes here. Nobody is paying taxes to support these kids. Or let me restate that. Nobody related to these kids is paying taxes and to fund their education. So who's paying for this? Every person with a job and owns property in San Antonio metro area, in Bexar County and the surrounding counties, is paying for these kids. Every tourist who comes to San Antonio, visits the Alamo, and buys a postcard, or buys a meal, or pays for a hotel room, or any kind of goods or service while they're on vacation visiting San Antonio, is paying for this because of the sales taxes and entertainment taxes. So that is who is paying for these 4,000 or so kids to go to school in our public schools. And get this straight, if you're a tax-paying citizen living within the district, that's your school. You paid for that. Not the city, not the state. That's yours. So you should have a right to say, who's going there and who's not. And when you have these illegal children, well, you know, they're entitled to an education. Okay, got it. But are they entitled to your children's education? Are they entitled to your kids' school books? Are they entitled to your child's school supplies? Because you know what they do, right? You buy everything on that school supply list. The kids bring it in along with those bags. Those Ziploc bags they're told to bring in. And what they do is they take and they say, okay, your kid brought in their supplies, so they have their fair share. And then the other half of it is going to be redistributed to those kids who don't have. So it's a 50% tax on your kids' school supplies. 50% of them go to somebody who doesn't have, redistributed. Good old communism there. You earned all this, but you only get to keep half of it. Your parents bought this for you, but you only get to keep half of it. You have to share. You have to share with these non-U.S. citizens who came here breaking the law. Now, granted, they're kids, so they didn't have much of a say in it, but still. I have to take issue with it. Folks, you can debate me on that one if you want. Go ahead and leave a comment under the podcast, or if you want to call in, if you're listening to this live, and give me your thoughts. I'd be very welcome to entertain them. But yeah, that's the latest on what's going on with these kids. Now, it's not all of them are going to be in the public schools. A lot of them are still going to be educated on your dime. They're just going to be educated in the detention centers where they're being held. They're going to start giving them classes there, which means they're going to be on the federal dime, which means everybody's tax money. So think about that, folks. But going back to the House floor, I don't know who if any of you were paying attention or saw any of this, but when the immigration bills were being discussed and debated, I forget which speaker it was, but he had the floor and he was talking, and Nutty Princess Nancy Pelosi, stepped off of her broom and decided to march across the House floor, waggling her finger and yelling and trying to scold the gentleman who had the floor for discussing immigration and bringing up facts. That she went over thinking she was Jan Brewer scolding the president there when the president, she came to her state and tried to tell her what was happening in her state. But she went waggling her finger. Miss, you have to pass it before you can read it. Went and waggled her finger at somebody for stating facts. Why? Because they were inconvenient and didn't fit the narrative that she was trying to sell. Poor Princess Nancy. So, she went and tried to shame somebody for telling the truth. Now, speaking of shaming, I got something for you folks. And this is a little bit of a heartbreaker. Well, I don't know if I would call it a heartbreaker. But this will pull on your heartstrings a little bit. A young mother, by young, I mean she was in her 30s. She's like 33, 34 years old or something like that. She's in her mid-30s. Not completely unattractive either. In fact, they kind of give her stats here. She's weighs about 120, 125 pounds, 33 years old. So it doesn't sound like she's obese. And they have pictures of her. She's not completely unattractive. But she's a mother of 5, married. So she's, she's not just one of those people that has a bunch of baby daddies and can't even necessarily get straight who's the father of whom. But, married woman, mother of 5, decides she's going to go to the beach. Now, she hasn't worn a 2-piece bathing suit in 13 years because she's given birth to 5 children. And she's a little bit self-conscious, but she finally got up the nerve to say, you know what, screw it. I'm going to the beach. I want to sunbathe. I want to get some color on my skin, soak up some vitamin D and some vitamin K. So she went and sunbathed. Now, she evidently was a petite thing when she gave birth to at least one of the children, if not all of them. Like I said, she's not a very large person to begin with, so she's got some stretch marks. Those nasty stretch marks. Folks, stretch marks on a mother's belly are not something to be ashamed of. They are badges of honor. they carried a life and produced a